They say solitude inspires creativity. But what if the quiet you seek isn't empty? Tonight, a reclusive writer retreats to a remote cabin only to discover something is writing him. The typewriter clicks in the dead of night, revealing secrets he's never told anyone. Will he survive the story or become part of it forever?
Hey everyone, welcome back to Silent Scream. If you're new here, buckle up because today's story will take you deep into the mountains, into a cabin where isolation isn't what it seems. Make sure you stay until the very end. You won't want to miss a single clatter of the typewriter. So here's the story. The cabin had been waiting for him. Nestled deep in the mountains, far from the hum of civilization, it promised solitude, a sanctuary for his thoughts. The reclusive writer, desperate to finish his novel, had chosen it for its silence, for the way the wind whispered through the pines like a forgotten secret. He unpacked his bags, arranged his typewriter on the desk by the window, and breathed in the crisp, pine-scented air. This was it, the perfect place to create. But the first night, when the moon cast pale shadows across the wooden floor, he heard it, the staccato clatter of keys. At first, he told himself it was the wind, or maybe an animal brushing against the porch. But as the nights passed, it became impossible to ignore. The sound wasn't random, it was deliberate, rhythmic, intimate. One morning, he found a sheet in his typewriter. He didn't remember writing it. The words were precise, familiar, but wrong. They spoke of his deepest fears, the ones he'd never confessed, the ones he barely understood himself. And the worst part, he knew, without knowing how, that the typewriter wasn't done. The first week passed in a blur of keystrokes and coffee-stained pages. At times, he felt productive, even inspired. But there was a tension, a tiny tremor in his chest whenever the night stretched long and silent. The cabin's isolation, which had seemed a blessing, now felt like a cage. Shadows moved in ways that didn't align with the moonlight. Footsteps echoed across empty halls, and always there was that typewriter, sitting patiently on the desk, as if it knew secrets he was only beginning to remember. On the third night, he swore he saw someone, or something standing in the corner of the study. The movement was settled, almost imperceptible. He froze, heart hammering, staring as the shape dissolved into the darkness. When he turned back to the desk, a sheet of paper had appeared. The words were crisp and cold. "You can't hide from yourself. You never could." A shiver ran down his spine. He had written nothing since arriving, yet the typewriter had produced lines that mirrored his private thoughts, memories he hadn't put to paper. He rifled through his own notes, his old drafts, and found nothing like it. Days blurred into nights. He tried to leave, but the forest outside seemed endless, twisting in ways that defied the maps he'd studied. The phone had no signal. The nearest road felt miles away, and each attempt to find it led him back to the cabin, as if the trees themselves were guiding him in circles. The typewriter began to dictate his life. It described arguments he had with friends and family, regrets he had buried deep. It wrote about his fear of dying alone, of being forgotten, of losing control. He tried to destroy it, throw it in the fireplace, smash it with a hammer, but every morning it returned, gleaming and untouched, the keys polished as if it invited him to write. Sleep became impossible. At night, the clattering filled the room, ceaseless, urgent. The words now taunted him. You see the darkness, but it sees you too. The writer found himself talking to the shadows, pleading with whatever inhabited the cabin. Show me, he whispered. Just tell me what you want. In the dim hours before dawn, he realized the typewriter didn't merely reveal his fears, it consumed them. Each page took a fragment of his sanity, leaving him hollow. He saw glimpses of faces in ink, his own face twisted in agony, screaming silently from the paper. He wanted to burn the pages, but they multiplied as soon as they were destroyed, spreading across the floor, piling into a wall of its own terror. He began to notice subtle changes in the words themselves. Sentences twisted in ways that mirrored his private thoughts before he even fully realized them. A line about fear of failure would morph into an accusation he never expected. You will never escape yourself. It was as if the typewriter was reading his mind, predicting his dread and recording it before he could deny it. One night, a knock came at the door. He froze. The cabin was miles from the nearest neighbor. The knocking repeated, soft, deliberate, trembling. He approached, hard hammering, only to find the porch empty. The fog outside seemed thicker, darker, pressing against the wooden walls. The knocking came again, this time from inside the cabin.
He tried leaving once more, stumbling down the steep trail into the forest. The trees seemed alive, their gnarled branches clawing at him, blocking paths he knew existed. The fog twisted around him, turning familiar paths into mazes. Every time he thought he had escaped, he emerged at the cabin's doorstep, panting and terrified, as if the forest itself was conspiring to trap him inside. Sleep became a fevered, fleeting state. In dreams, he saw the cabin alive with movement, the walls breathing, the shadows whispering secrets he couldn't comprehend. The typewriter typed in his dream too, clattering like a heartbeat he could not escape. Each morning he woke drenched in sweat, a new sheet in the typewriter, words fresh and haunting, detailing the night he just lived. Eventually, he realized he was no longer alone even when he was. The cabin seemed to pulse with consciousness. The figure in the corner, sometimes shadowed, sometimes vaguely human, followed him silently. He spoke to it, begged it to leave, but it only watched, patient and unyielding, as if it were the author, and he merely a character in the story it had written long before his arrival. He began speaking to the typewriter, typing questions in desperation. Why me? What do you want? The keys responded almost immediately, rattling were answers he didn't expect. To write, to remember, to reveal. The letters formed a rhythm, a language he didn't fully understand, yet somehow felt personal. Every sheet produced revealed his insecurities, his shame, the mistakes he had hidden even from himself. The nights grew colder, the shadows darker. The figure in the corner was no longer always stationary. It moved when he wasn't watching, always just at the edge of vision. Sometimes it appeared reflected in the typewriter's glossy surface, grinning faintly, whispering in a voice that sounded like his own. You belong here. You always have. He stopped trusting his own thoughts. When he wrote in his journal, the pages seemed blank at first, but overnight the ink bled back in strange, half-legible messages, confessions he had never written, fears he hadn't known he carried. The cabin was no longer a place to create. It was a place to confess, and he was the only willing prisoner. By the time he stopped trying to resist, the writer had vanished into the story itself. His reflection in the window no longer matched his movements. It lingered, watching him, judging him. He could feel the cabin breathing, alive, and the typewriter clicking endlessly, as if satisfied by the work it had extracted. He understood then that he was not writing his story anymore. The story was writing him. Months passed, or was it weeks? Time had no meaning. He spoke less and less, barely moving except to feed himself scraps of food. The cabin, the typewriter, and the voices, they had become the world.
Occasionally, he caught glimpses of the figure again in the corner of the room, always watching, always patient. He had begun writing again, but not his novel. The typewriter guided him, and the words that flowed were not his, yet felt intimately his. Confessions, fears, memories, and regrets laid bare for a reader that might never exist. He tried leaving once more. He walked into the forest, away from the cabin, hoping to escape. The mist returned, thicker now, swallowing everything. Hours, or perhaps days later, he returned to the cabin, drawn by some irresistible gravity. The door opened with a creak, the typewriter gleamed in. Pages were waiting, blank and expectant. By then, he no longer fought. He wrote because he had no choice. His hands moved faster than thought, typing horrors he did not invent, telling truth he did not wish to know. The cabin hummed with satisfaction. Shadows danced. The wind whispered. Visitors, if they ever came, would find a cabin deep in the mountains, its windows dark, the door closed. Inside, a typewriter waited on a desk. Sheets of paper filled the room, each bearing confessions of a man who had vanished long ago. Confessions of fears, regrets, and terrors so personal that reading them felt like staring into one's own soul. The clattering continued, relentless, a warning to any who dared enter. Here solitude is a promise, and the guest may never leave.
Years passed, but the cabin remained unchanged, perfect and isolated. Hikers occasionally stumbled upon it, drawn by its rustic charm, but few lingered. Those who did sometimes reported hearing faint typing at night, a rhythm almost human, almost pleading. Inside, the typewriter continued its work, pages piled high, a testament to the writer who no longer existed. His body perhaps vanished, his mind consumed, yet his essence recorded in ink. Each letter was precise, intimate, terrifying, revealing fears the reader hadn't even known they harbored. And if you listened closely, if you stood quietly in the darkened room, you could hear it. The soft clatter of keys, the silent guest dictating a story you weren't meant to read. A story that waits for new ears, new hands to type, new souls to reveal themselves. The cabin waits, the typewriter waits, and the guest is never truly gone.
If you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss our next horror story. And comment below, what would you do if the typewriter knew your darkest secrets? Until next time, keep your doors locked and your imagination sharper.